video games today better than they were in the past? Think about your answer right now and keep it in mind for the end of the video. It'll be important. The other thing to keep in mind is that there's a certain reason why great games are the way they are. And in answering the question of whether or not newer games are better than older ones, we'll also find the reason great games are even able to exist. Now, to really answer this question, we need to know just what makes a good video game. So let's head to the past and look at one of the best 2D platformers of all time. Super Mario World is a small, little-known niche platform. Yeah, you get the joke. This game perfectly demonstrates one of the most important principles in gaming, the ability to teach without actually telling the player what to do. Check this out. There's a bullet bill in this first stage, and this indent in the ground that you can stand in. If you crouch, you can dodge the bullet bill. The game never tells you this directly, it's just something you figure out on your own. So why does this matter? Well, later on in the fortress level, the exact same ditch appears with no apparent threat. When I got to this part, I instinctively crouched expecting to have to dodge something, and wouldn't you know it, a massive wooden mallet came slamming down and just barely missed me because I was crouched. The game didn't have to tell me to do this. It was something I naturally did because of how brilliantly this game is designed. Not to mention, the movement of this game is fantastic. Now, if you can believe it, I'm not very good. But I'd imagine if I was good, I'd be able to fly through these levels with the cape and just the general momentum that this game offers. But this is all just gameplay, and games aren't just about gameplay. There's so much more to them, and nothing better demonstrates that than another game from the 90s. Chrono Trigger is one of the greatest games I have ever played, and it's all thanks to its environments, characters, and of course its iconic plot filled with some of the most unbelievable twists of any story. But let's talk about those environments. Every single time period you travel to in this game feels unique and has its own distinct style to it. From the Stone Age to the distant future, it's genuinely difficult to get bored of these environments because they're all so different. Most games take place in just one of these settings. Chrono Trigger takes place in like 6 of them. Of course, these environments wouldn't mean much without the context. You know, the reason you go from place to place? I can't say much about this story without spoiling it, so how about I just tell you this instead? This game is 27 years old, and yet I refuse to spoil even the slightest aspect of the plot. It's just that good that I can't rob you of this experience if you haven't already played it. And if you haven't already played it, what are you doing? It's 27 years old, get to it. So the next question, of course, becomes, do newer games capture this same magic? Well, let's look at a recent 2D platformer and one of my favorite games of all time, Celeste. Now, I didn't understand why people partook in speedrunning. I always thought it looked terribly painful to just constantly reset the same levels over and over. That is, until I played Celeste and realized that speedrunning is all about practicing a game's mechanics and refining your skills to the point of mastery. You would only really do this for 2 reasons. Either the game is extremely rewarding and satisfying, or you just love it that much. But some games are special. Some games fall into both categories, and Celeste is one of them. With the most refined movement of any game I've ever played, and engaging challenges that feel gratifying to complete every single time, this game truly captures what it means to be a platformer. But it's still just a platformer, right? What about something more difficult to create, to emulate? Is there a modern day Chrono Trigger? Well, ask yourself 2 things. 1, would I be making this video if there wasn't? And 2, are you subscribed? You can check by pressing that red button at the bottom. I get worse at this every time, I swear. Anyway, Xenoblade, that's the game. Xenoblade Chronicles really is something special. And while there is a lot to talk about with this game, I want to focus on one particular part of the game that I feel is the least recognized. If you've heard anything about Xenoblade, you know that it's a game that takes place on the backs of 2 titans perpetually frozen in time. A super unique setting for sure, but it's the areas of these titans that are really special. I remember constantly asking myself how a game could have environments this beautiful. I can't count how many times I had to stop and just take it all in. But just talking about this does very little in the way of communicating how magical some of these areas actually are. It really is something you have to experience for yourself. Of course, the story has its twists and turns just like Chrono Trigger. And while I think Chrono Trigger might have better characters, Xenoblade might have a better story. I don't know, it's too close to call. So instead, let's just answer the question from the beginning. So remember your answer from the beginning? Well, it turns out you were right. Congratulations. See, when it comes to quality this high, you quickly reach a point where it's nearly impossible to give a definitive answer. So whether or not games have gotten better or worse is really up to you. But what about that other question? Well, the reason great games are able to exist has nothing to do with the decade they were released in. Great games are made when visionaries with an idea that could change the world do everything in their power to make that dream a reality. So long as those people exist, so long as we have artists willing to pour their souls into these masterpieces, games will always be special, regardless of the generation.